Welcome to the Two Texts Podcast. I'm your host, David Harvey, and I'm here with my co-host, John Andrews. In this podcast, we're two friends in two different countries, here every 2 weeks, talking about two different texts from the Bible. This is our launch series, however, so we're bringing you a daily episode of the two of us talking about the parables of Jesus. This is episode 4, and it's called Flash Parables Part 2.
So let's read these beautiful parables about the treasure and the pearl. So you get the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a veil, same word as we've already discovered there in the context of that. This is verse 44. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought the field. Now, when we just read that on its own, it's not making sense. But remember the trajectory we've just gone on, this idea of the yeast that is hidden. Then the fact that from Psalm 78, Jesus is uttering the hidden things, the misunderstood things, and revealing them. And then to wrap that up, verses 45, 46, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Now, there's no direct reference to hiddenness within that parable, but the emphasis is foundness. He's seeking and he found it. And of course, again, our listeners might hear the nuance of Jesus's words in Matthew. If you seek, same word as used here in this parable, a merchant seeking or looking for fine pearls. Jesus uses that word when he says, seek and you will find. And the word found there, again, is the same idea. So you get this beautiful correlation. Something is hidden in plain sight. Jesus is now, as the new prophet, uttering those hidden things and explaining them through the parables, so that once we get them and they're no longer hidden, we share that treasure. We pass that treasure on to those, and I think that's the connectedness within the Matthew 13 text. I think once we see that, I think it all links together. And again, it stops us from vacuumizing the statements, because there's often a flow of trajectory and thought in the ministry of Jesus. And I think that hiddenness is a beautiful link that helps us from Matthew 13 to Luke 13 back to Matthew 13.
And I love that, John. It's really, again, there's a lot of stuff going on there, even right down to teaching us how we should think about reading the Bible, that we need to read it in bigger chunks, because they might be kind of tying things together. And so come to this then, this idea of these two parables then. Again, two sentences, the kind of Jesus really maximizing the one sentence parable here. And I think people will find this as you explore the parables, how many of them are really short, just single lines forming part of a bigger discourse, which is kind of, Jesus is just nudging at you slowly but surely, dropping all these earworms. But this idea of the kind of hide and seek duo here, kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, and a man found it. There's a little bit of, we got to think about this laterally at some point, and trying to think about what's actually going on here, and how is this actually going? There's a question I find myself getting: is the first man even looking for it? Right? Is he actually seeking, or does he fall over it? Is he, well, there's a lot of interesting things, but you almost get the sense in the parable that he stumbles over it. There's a lot of silence to fill in here, but a man found it, and I love that image of he finds it and then decides, well, I need to make sure that I get this. So he puts it back in the dirt, covers it over. It's a bit Pirates of the Caribbean almost. And that's it. But there's a bit that jumps out to me, John, that I'm seeing a theme in this chapter of Matthew. So there's a lot of seed gets scattered. If we go back, to think about the parable of the sower, there's a lot of seed. It gets scattered everywhere. Right now, there's a lot of dough, and the yeast gets worked through all of it, right? And then there's a mustard seed that goes in a field, and it kind of grows throughout the field. And now you have a man, he finds a treasure So it's small enough to hide in a field. But interestingly, in his joy, he doesn't go out and buy the corner of the field where he's hid the treasure. He doesn't go to someone and go, hey, listen, I want to buy that northwest corner of your field, right? He buys the whole field of mud for a treasure that we're not actually explained what the treasure is. All that we come away with is this man is willing to hideously overpay, right? So again, put it in modern terms. You walk into a second-hand car dealership and discover that right in the middle of this car dealership, they happen to have rusting away in the corner, James Dean's Ford Mustang from Bullitt, right? And so you realize, oh my goodness, this is a piece of iconic, Western film history. I've got to own this. And the owner doesn't even realize that he's got this car. Then most of us, what we know how that story ends is you go and go, you got a rusty old Ford Mustang up there. Can I buy it off you? But this parable says, no, you go to the owner and go, I'm buying your whole dealership. I'm buying every car you've got in order to get that. You get this sense of the holisticness of the kingdom, that it's, that we're all in.
Again, we have to be careful to argue from silence. It just tells us treasure amounts or size or, this is after all a made up story by Jesus. But,
yeah.
but it is significant enough. So, and I concur with you. I think the inference is he stumbles over it. And I think there's a beautiful juxtaposition between the parable of the treasure and the parable of the pearl sitting beside each other, because you've got somebody who stumbles and someone who's looking. So you got this man, he's just going about his world, and maybe in the wider context of our conversation, he's in the crowd and the sower is scattering this kingdom seed. And he goes, whoa, I didn't expect to find that. And he looks at this young rabbi on the hill and goes, I think that's the treasure. And so he goes home, squares up, and follows this man. So I think you've got maybe a picture, sideways picture. I love the sort of the car lot picture. You've got someone who turned up to hear this young rabbi speak and suddenly is whacked. He's full on. He's hit full on with his treasure. And he goes, okay. We got to do something about this right now. So this treasure is so significant that a man is prepared to go liquidate everything he has to buy the field. Now I think that's got to grab you. That's got to grab the crowd. It grabs me. I'm going, wow. Okay, there's something going on here in the context of this treasure that is worth everything to get it. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that sense of the hiddenness of it, he stumbles across it. And Jesus is even suggesting to this crowd, some of you are going to stumble over this thing. You can't even see it now, but you're going to be on your way home and you're going to fall over this treasure. And it's going to change everything. And I think that's beautiful. And then I think the other parable relates to the fact that there are people in that crowd and they are looking, and Jesus knows they are. They've walked miles to hear him speak. They haven't just turned up for like a free lunch and a miracle. These people have been waiting for the kingdom of God. And we know there are people like them because in the Lucan text, it talks of Anna the prophetess and Simeon, literally waiting for the kingdom to come. They've been waiting for this thing, whatever it looks like. And this merchant, I think, represents a bunch of people of all shapes and sizes, religious, irreligious, whatever the label, but they're looking. And I those two parables together, David, so encouraged me because I think, again, I keep repeating this idea of Jesus' confidence in the seed, confidence in the kingdom. I just think, my goodness, there are people out there in planet non-religious that are going to be going about their daily business and they're going to fall over this treasure. They'll literally stumble over it and go, whoa, never. What's that all about? And it will change their lives. And I also think there are millions of people, if not billions of people, and they're looking for a pearl. And in order to find that pearl of greatest price, they may have to have opened a few dodgy oysters.
Yeah. Of course, oysters are not kosher. Oysters are not kosher, are they? So again, you've got that same slight uncleanliness sort of theme. Oysters are not kosher. But here's where it might be hidden. Fields are muddy, and and farming's not always the funnest of jobs. Yeast is unclean, but it's hidden in the dough.
It points to the fact in terms of farming, like shellfish and stuff like that, which the Torah has a lot to say about. Then the inference is, the person looking here may not be. So again, you have just as you've had the juxtaposition in terms of the Mark 5 stuff we've already talked about. Probably a Gentile delivered from demons, an outstanding Jewish man honored by the synagogue, and then the woman unclean. You've got here potentially, a farmer. In the agricultural context of Galilee doing that. But then, hold on, somebody's looking for pearls. And the fact that this is not going to end up on a Jewish dinner table means that either he's not searching, he's not farming for food, he's farming for pearls. And the other little implication might be that, again, Jesus nudges into a sort of a non-Jewish searcher, which is an interesting little nuance if you're prepared to hang that up there.
So I think there's definitely a sense that the merchant isn't a well-liked character in the ancient world. They're a bit of, even in Shakespeare, they're a bit of a Shylock, a bit of a trickster. You don't trust a merchant in that sense, do you? And so it's interesting, and in fact, there's actually a little piece in Matthew's Greek that I think is worth mentioning here. So I agree with you, John. I think that again, it's another character. Oysters are not kosher. So pearl hunting's a slightly offside industry at the best of times. You've got a merchant, slightly offside person, in some sort of sense. But notice what the Greek does in this. So it says again, Jesus told them what the kingdom of heaven was like. But the Greek reads, and I understand why the English translation smooth this out. The Greek reads, a merchant was seeking for fine, and I love, by the way, the Greek word, I just got to mention this for no point, margaritas. the Greek word for pearl is margarita. And so I'll let our listeners can go and look up that connection in their own time. But this, it's a merchant. Right? So this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. A merchant was seeking for fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Well, I'm just stretching into some nuance here, so don't bet your house on this or anything like that. But he's a merchant. By the end of the parable, he's not a merchant anymore, right? Because if he sells everything he has, so his cart, his horse, his marketplace shack, if all of that's gone, now his ability, because merchant, literally the Greek word emporo, which is where we get the term emporium from, which is a kind of, but is literally a traveler. It's one who travels about to buy and sell, trade. Well, if he basically liquidates all of that, he loses the ability to do this anymore. Now he's just a man with a pearl. He used to be a merchant looking for pearls. Now he's just a man with a pearl, and he has no mechanism. And again, I'm pushing into it, but I think that comes back to Matthew's really interesting wording: a merchant. The kingdom of God just scrape deeper into our identity? That we see him as a merchant, but he's actually he's a human, right? And his anthropos is actually the Greek word. So a human, a merchant. That the kingdom of God scrapes away all of the uncleanliness, all of the social sort of stuff that we would burden on people, and it's now just a person looking for something great. And which point, isn't that all of us at some level?
Absolutely beautiful. No, I love that. And again, I think that leans into the sort of layers of the text without taking us into reading into the text too much. I think there are layers within it that support a nuance that goes, wow, that's that. So here's a sense in which a discovery literally changes the trajectory of a man's world. He's prepared to change his way of life because of what he has discovered. And of course, without reading too much into the parable before, the man ploughing the field could be a labourer, part of that bigger estate, and so one who is maybe a peasant living in subsistence culture, and somehow he now becomes a landowner. He becomes someone who owns this thing because of what he has found. His motivation, and in many ways, both men, their status changes because of what they have discovered. It forces the change. They cannot. So this is the beautiful idea, which I think you've articulated magnificently, David. I think they cannot stay the same, having discovered the treasure, right? So it's back to our little convo. You can't, once you've seen it, you now struggle to unsee it. You've got to put that somewhere. You've either got to grab it, run with it, throw yourself into it, or you've got to find a file big enough to contain that thing and just put it in a box and put it away. But here's two men not prepared to do that. They're not prepared to stuff the hidden back in the box. They're actually, no, we got to have this, and their worlds, both their worlds, if we're prepared to follow the trajectory of the conversation in a slightly more literal way, both their worlds then radically change because of the treasure, because of the pearl. They literally have to do a different way of living to make this work. And I think that's the kingdom of God. So what is the kingdom of heaven like? Well, it's hard to describe, but when you bump into it, when you discover it, when you find it, you can't stay the same. If you really see what we see, if you really discover the treasure that Jesus is now bringing out from the hiddenness, he's uttering the hidden things of the kingdom through these parables. Once you discover this, there's no going back if we really grab it. And I love that. And I think that makes sense of all that hidden revealed stuff and that tension of, those that have, more will be given. Those that don't have, it'll be taken away. It's the idea of the Isaiah quote. I think that helps square that circle. It fits all of that together because actually what Jesus is saying in the context of the buried treasure and the merchant, these are people that got a bit and then grab more. All right, they didn't just settle. He didn't just settle for the pearl. He went, right, I've got to have this, and so and they push further. And I think that's the energy to me. That literally gets my pulse up as I think about that, because I go, well, that's worth giving your life to.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because in one sense, as interpreters, there's a caution in us, and you feel it, I think, in both of us, of going, I kind of want to push this and say this about this story, but I also realize I'm dealing with one sentence that gives me very little data, But I think when you do it the way you've explained it there, you realize, well, of course that's what's going on in this story, because this is what happens. This is what happens throughout Jesus's encounters with people. People are, you've got, Levi just gets up and walks away. The early disciples just abandon their fishing businesses and they come and follow Jesus. Peter says, we've left everything to follow you. Jesus is the pearl. And then you also get, the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus and decides, no, I'm not willing to do that. That's not in my kind of, remit to be able to do that. It is. So at some level, we see the kingdom of heaven work out exactly like this throughout the Gospels. Actually, this is quite a common story of the spoken, yes, I'm leaving everything to follow, and then sometimes the unspoken, those who don't.
When you follow down to the end of Matthew 13, Jesus then tells what feels like an out-of-step parable. So we've got the sort of the treasure and the pearl, and in the parable of the net, and it sort of feels like a change of gear within that. And he concludes that parable by it's almost a parable of judgment around that, which is really quite profound. But then he says this, verse 51, he says, "Have you understood all these things?" Jesus asked. And they go, "Yeah." And you go, "Yeah, really? Okay."
I always, when I read that passage, I feel like, and I mean this with the deepest respect, have you understood all this? I feel like it should read, yes, they lied. Because it's the confidence where they go, yes, we've got it. And you can like you say, really?
Absolutely. So we just read on and we get past that humorous moment. And verse 52, he said to them, "Therefore, every teacher of the law who has become a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like what? An owner of a house." Now look at that. So the two parables, the pearl and the treasure, move people from almost servant to owner, right? Both of them become owners. One becomes owner of the treasure in the field. The other one becomes owner of the pearl, right? So look at this. It's like the owner of a house. Look at this, David. It's magnificent. Who brings out of his storeroom what? New treasures as well as old. Boom. There we have Psalm 78 connected. It's back to this idea that what Jesus is doing through the parables is uttering the hidden things. They're not new things. They're old things that have been misunderstood. But of course, in bringing them to his audience, there is new things in the old. And he's exactly saying that. He's bringing out of the storeroom new treasures, same word as our lovely man who found his treasure in the field. Treasures, old and new alike. And then as if to burst that bubble, David, as if to burst that so here we are, we're lifted up into the higher, and we're going, oh my goodness, Jesus has strung all these amazing pearls together in Matthew 13. Forgive the pun. He has literally strung, ideas are bouncing all around in us now, hidden, found, all of these gorgeous nuances, transformation and ownership. And then we're now excited. And then verses 53 to 58 show you the paradoxical dynamic that Jesus has to deal with. Verse 53, when Jesus had finished these parables, he moved from there. Coming to his hometown, he began to teach the people in the synagogue, and they were amazed. Where did he get this teaching? Verse 57, and they took offense at him. So we've just had all this amazing dialogue about treasure, hidden stuff, yeast, the Psalm 78 connection. If you find the treasure, sell your whole estate to get it. If you find that pearl, boom, you have hit the jackpot. He goes home, and they took offense at him. It's just, wow. It's just, you think, Matthew, why did you end this magnificent chapter on that? Because that's exactly the paradox of the parables. There are people that are going to find treasure that will change their lives, and then there's going to be a bunch of people that will go, no. And they took offense at him. And Jesus actually says a prophet is not without honor except in his own town and in his own home. And tragically, verse 58, the very last verse of Matthew 13, and he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. Oh, it's just the paradox of Matthew 13. When you read it as a sweep, follow the trajectory, and then land on that, you are, oh my goodness, how is it possible to miss this treasure? And yet they did. So to me, it's a magnificent piece of writing by Matthew, how he puts those ideas together and has the courage to end a magnificent chapter on parables with treasure and pearls flying everywhere with, and here's the sad reality.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
It's quite phenomenal the way the whole thing kind of wraps itself up, and it strikes me that this is what we're dealing with in terms of the ministry of Jesus, because I suppose this would be my kind of thought with both the parables in 44 and 45. What strikes me as interesting is that the treasure or the pearl is present already. So there's a tendency sometimes to think about the kingdom of heaven as something that's coming in the future. So we read these sort of texts and go, oh, that's something that's going to happen some way from here. And there's a sense in which, if you think that way, you're always looking ahead for, when's it going to happen? And then these parables are going, well, no, it's already here. It's just, unfortunately, it's over there in all that mud, or unfortunately, it's encased in gross oyster. And, so the question is, like going back to your hiding and seeking metaphor, it's just, you're going to have to start looking differently. You're going to have to start seeing things differently, which I think is what's being wrestled with, in all of the parables, is this contrast, this dis-dash course. The way you think isn't going to help you make sense of this. So if you think the kingdom of heaven, and I think this is true for us today as much as it was true for Jesus' original listeners, if you are constantly looking, going, oh, when we all get there, you miss the fact that Jesus is saying, no, it's already here. It's already amongst you. And you're missing it if you're not careful. So you can literally take offense and reject Jesus, not because you're anti-God, but because actually you're expecting God to come in a different way, and you're not prepared to accept him in the way that he's actually come.
So good. So good. And I think if you connect the end of Matthew, and they took offense at him, with treasure in a muddy field and a pearl in a non-kosher food. Boom. I mean, the yeast, the uncleanness of the yeast in the. I mean, it's. I'm literally welling up with them. I'm struggling to not cry listening to that, because I go, wow, what else have we missed, David?
Yes.
Like, as humans, we're like, even in our brokenness, we're so arrogant, aren't we? Like I know I'm speaking generally, I'm not speaking for everybody, but we're arrogant, and even in faith, we're arrogant. We think we know stuff. We think we've worked God out. We think we've worked the text out, and then we discover treasure in the mud, and we go, how have I missed that? And I never want to be on the wrong side of, and they took offense at him. Do you know what I mean? And just because the Jesus that I'm now being confronted with is like in an oyster, or he's wrapped up in mud, or he's covered in yeast. I don't want to go, what? No, that's not. I want to have my heart open that says, Lord, I never want to lose wonder in the kingdom of God. I don't want to get in the wrong side of that.
And I like, I was reading in my sort of just devotional journey the other morning there, that scene in Acts when Peter's lying on the roof and he has that vision of all these unclean animals coming down, and he hears the Lord say, take and eat. And, and Peter goes, no, I've never eaten anything unclean. And then there's that line, isn't there? Don't call unclean what the Lord has called clean. And, we might be okay with muddy fields and leavened bread and oysters, but is there stuff we're calling unclean? And actually, the kingdom of God is hidden in that, And you get this beautiful scene that follows where Peter has to turn up at Cornelius' house, and you can see Peter's out of his depth. He's like, this is not what I'm trained for. And, and yet God, the Holy Spirit, works through that situation, almost echoing this parable that, that there are treasures, in fields. And so for us as a kind of modern listener, it's like there's a superiority that could come and go, oh yeah, come on, Peter, get on board. Bacon sandwiches are nice. Well, it's easy for us to look at stuff we already think is clean and assume that that's okay. But we have our own boundary lines where we go, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with God's kingdom being there. And this group of parables seem to suggest, well, get comfortable quickly, because your offense might lead you to miss what Jesus is doing.
Yeah, no, brilliant. There's a magnificent scene in the Magnificent series called The Chosen. I know you've watched it, and I've watched it a number of times. It's only got 6 episodes, and I have cried through every single one. Every single one. And there's a magnificent scene where Matthew, the tax collector, is called. And they depict Matthew brilliantly. I don't want to give it away, but if anyone's out there and they haven't seen The Chosen, free app, you download it and watch the episodes for free, and you can make a donation if you want. But it's fantastic. It's really, really brilliantly written, and whoever has advised on the writing of that really has understood the spirit of what's going on around there. And so Jesus stops at Matthew's booth, Roman guard, locked behind his booth, and Jesus says, "Matthew, come and follow me." And Peter steps in, and Peter goes, "Hey, what are you doing? Don't you know who this is?" And Jesus says, "Yeah, of course I do." And so, he says, "Well, I called you, didn't I?" And Peter said, "But this is different." When he's calling the tax collector, "But this is different." And Jesus turned to him and said, "Peter, get used to different." And I love I love the fact that, all right, that's a very Western way of interpreting Jesus, but I love the fact that actually Jesus was constantly saying to his world, you need to get used to different. Whether it's a healing of a woman in a synagogue on a Shabbat, or whether it's yeast in the dough, or whether it's pearls and oysters and treasure in muddy fields, or even to his own community, a little village, not even on the post, the map of its day, going home and going, hey, get used to different. This is not what you expect. And if you keep hanging out for what you expect, you're not going to find the treasure. If you keep hanging out for what you expect, you're not going to hear what I want to say to you. And you will end up being on the wrong side of this conversation, which of course would be the ultimate tragedy, to have had the treasure actually in your field and never to have discovered it. Oh my goodness, it's a tragedy and a challenge.
All right, that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode from our launch series on parables. If you want to get in touch with either of us about something we said in the show, you can reach out to us on podcast@twotext.com, or by liking and following the Two Text Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you did enjoy what we had to say today, we'd love it if you left a review or a comment where you're listening from. And if you really enjoyed it, why don't you share it with a friend? But that is it for now. We're back tomorrow with another parable for all of you. But until then, goodbye.